Hey everybody, thank you so much for being here today. Sorry that we're a little bit late. We were just trying to set up and let everybody log in. So you are here today for Master Technical Recruiting Workshop, How to Recruit Top Tech Talent with Patrick Christell. My name is Ashley. If you haven't met me, I work with the Recruiting Daily team, and we're excited about this one today. How are you doing today, Patrick?
Great, how are you?
Good, good. I'm sitting in a really squeaky chair. So if you hear it, I'm sorry about that. But other than that, doing really, really well. We're going to stall just a few minutes while we let everybody log in. Patrick, do you mind going to the next slide? And while we're waiting, we'll go over the plan. You are in listen only mode. So that means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. But that's okay. We have a questions panel to your right that should allow you to ask questions if you would like to speak with Patrick. We will hold most of these till the end, but please feel free to ask away. Ask as many questions as you like, and we'll get to everything that we can. Also, we're live, so please share using the R Daily hashtag all over social media. Just because we've started doesn't mean people can't join. So definitely let them know where you are. And we're recording. You will receive a copy of the slide deck and recording right after the webinar. So just keep an eye on your inbox. At the next few hours, you'll get this copy as well as some educational material from, and do you mind going to the next slide, Patrick? Glassdoor. So Glassdoor, if you don't know that name, which I'm sure you do, is one of the world's largest job and recruiting sites. And we've been working with Glassdoor for quite some time. Fantastic people. It's pretty amazing to get to know them from the inside. Job seekers on Glassdoor are well researched and more informed about the jobs and companies they apply to and consider joining. This is why thousands of employers across every industry and size turn to Glassdoor to help them recruit and hire quality candidates at scale who stay longer, which is always a really good thing. Thank you so much, Glassdoor, for being here with us today. So Patrick, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I'm fixing to put you on the spot. Is that cool?
Sure. So I'm not great at describing myself. I would say that this little explanation here does a better job. But the bulk of my experience in the world of recruiting has to do with tech, from the enterprise to startup consultant level. And startups are where I like to be because the processes haven't yet been ossified, and you get a lot of open-minded people, and it's that old saw, move fast and break things. I think that when it comes to implementing new processes, that could be a good thing. So that's why I like to be in tech and I like to be in startups. I've been doing this for 7 years, and I came to it by a chance introduction to Shally Steckerl when I was asked to help him rewrite his book. I was a writer in Hollywood for many years before that. So the place that I came to from this is research. And you're going to hear a lot about research in this presentation. So without further ado, this is what we're going to talk about: how to recruit top tech talent. Now, I imagine that there's folks in this webinar that are very experienced, and there's folks in this webinar that are not so experienced. I'm going to be referencing certain things that I use in my quote unquote tech stack. And the purpose of this is you're going to learn how to spin up a sourcing function from nothing, how to find qualified tech candidates, even if you have zero background on the role. And that's usually, even if you've been doing this for years, that's the kind of situation that you're going into. Chances are, unless you came from the world of software development, you didn't know what an SDET was until you encountered a rec that was an SDET. And then you did some homework on it and realized, oh, okay, this is like a QA, only not. You're going to learn tools, extensions, and processes that I use. Those descriptions aren't going to get very granular. I'm just going to assume, being sourcers and recruiters yourself, that you can find these things and get everything you want out of these tools without me having to explain it step by step. I'm going to cover the broad strokes. We're going to talk about how I make a ad hoc CRM, how to implement continuous improvement, and how to engage candidates in 2019, and some other fun stuff. So here we go. This is an example of a wheel of iteration, right? So before you start in any new role, let's say you start working for a new company or start consulting for a new firm, you want to get a sense of what the recruitment life cycle is going to be. And it can be daunting at first. It can be tough to get a sense of this, but in the beginning, you should at least try and, kind of figure out some of the spokes on this wheel. So this is one that has worked for me and that I've used. And the biggest one in the beginning, you come to the hiring manager with value, several profiles that you bring them to say, hey, I may be off, but now we have something to talk about. And then outreach, conversion, etc. And then you're back to the beginning. This will make some more sense later on. So the first step, understanding what your hiring manager wants. Now, the way to do that is you have an intake meeting that I would consider probing. Now, I've been in a lot of situations where I didn't have control over this and I had to fight for it. So if I were you guys, I would fight for this. It is very tough to get a bead on a new role without an intake that is quite in depth. So one of the biggest reasons why this happens is hiring managers in the past, at some point, have taken time out of their day to do what they think you're going to do, and it has led to basically more wasting of their time, crappy candidates, headaches, and miscalibration. And it's hard to convince them that this time it's going to be different. And that's why one of the things you can do is bring those pre-calibrated, we're going to call them pre-calibrated because you haven't really calibrated with the hiring manager yet, pre-calibrated resumes into the interview. And if you tell them that you know that you're a guardian of their time, they're going to regard you with a level of respect heretofore unseen. And you're going to get buy-in from them later, which is key. So the next thing, is obviously research. You're going to research, and I'll tell you how to guide your research and some things to do. If you are embedded, if you're full-time or whether you're a contractor, a lot of you guys are remote, but in the beginning, what you can do is if you get that on-site to kick off the contract, ask to sit with the developers. That's going to give you huge insight into company culture. And when people talk about culture, it's kind of an indefinable thing. And I've seen lots of debates about this on message boards and what have you. I would just define it as how people communicate, how people talk about projects. And you'll see when you're sitting with a team that they're going to have a shorthand that's germane to that environment, and you think you can get a sense of it, but it's really tough to do that unless you're actually sitting with them. You can imagine that it probably, a pod of developers at Accenture is going to have different ways of speaking, acting, reporting, etc., than a pod of developers at Facebook. But to actually sit there and talk to them and listen to them, listen to how they talk to each other is invaluable. I can't recommend it enough. So research-wise, one of the things in my stack is called glossary tech. Now, I did not come from the world of software development, so I had to learn all of this from the ground up. Glossary tech is an extension that highlights tech-related words on any page that you go to, and then when you hover over them, you can read them. So for this example, we're going to do DevOps, which I found is kind of sticky and tricky for a lot of folks because it doesn't really speak to, it's more of a philosophy. It's a portmanteau of the words development and operations. So a good starting point, if you're confused, is you start to read articles, start to read Stack Exchange, start to read blogs by industry leaders, whatever it is, but have that glossary tech going in the background so you can get a really good sense of how what they're saying fits together. From there, craft a role-specific intake. Now, I'm sure that hiring managers have had intakes before, but if you research the right way and you research in a probing manner, you can have an intake meeting that is very specific. And the more specific it is, the less time you're going to waste, and the less waste all around is going to take place. For instance, this is a real intake that I did after researching this DevOps role. So after looking at the resume with glossary tech and reading more about the philosophy of DevOps, as opposed to site reliability management, I came up with some questions, such as, what is the DAU? Concurrency, user base. DAU is daily active users. So if you have a mobile app, for instance, that becomes a very important consideration. And if you are handling uptime, which means the amount of time that the particular app is going to be live without crashing, then things like concurrency become important, right? So you'll see where I have the company blanked out. Are you looking for someone with user base and concurrency levels at or above what your company has? And usually I've found, and this is the time that I discovered that in DevOps situations, that's exactly what they want. They want somebody, if you are going to be considered to be hired for a DevOps position at a mobile app that services millions of users throughout the globe, you are probably not going to want to hire the DevOps architect for a public school in Missouri because they do not know the scaling challenges that you're dealing with. So how did I know any of this? Solid research. And then from this, the answers that I get, I included a few of them. So let's highlight some answers. Give you a second to read this here. So they're actually using Golang, but it's too new. We are weak in stream processing tools or data pipeline tools. So apparently there's a data engineer aspect to this. And I know that because I know what Kafka and Kinesis can be used for. So find folk with that experience. Continuous integration, continuous deployment tools like Jenkins. So there's a automation aspect to this. And then what I mentioned about uptime is addressed here. Uptime presently in the 999s, but we need higher availability. We are benchmarking quadruple nines by end of year and need the kind of engineer that will get us there. So in my research, I discovered that the difference between 999s and quadruple nines, both of these things refer to how long a platform is up every month. So if a platform is up every month and is down for maintenance or it crashes for a total of a half an hour, that's 999s. If it crashes for a total of 3 minutes, that's quadruple nines. And if it crashes for a total of 3 seconds, that's quintuple nines. Now that's very, very tough to achieve. But if you're a DevOps person, you find pride in being able to take platforms from, say, a 999 availability level to a quadruple nine availability level. It's a badge of honor. And so that gets involved in the screening questions with the hiring manager, and so he answers them. So from there, you can go to your tool of choice, and for this example, I choose Hiretual, but there's other tools that can ingest resumes and give you answers. So parse the JD with Hiretual. And here's the interesting part. So one of the things you're trying to get in a good hiring manager intake is a way to read between the lines, because the resume is going to say what they need. You know, what are the must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves. But if you ask probing questions in the right way, you're going to get a lot more information. And what you can do is, before entering the job description into a parsing tool that uses AI to extract keywords from it and give you profiles, you can revise the resume a little bit. Like, for instance, in this particular role, there was no mention of the ETL data pipeline tools like Kafka or Kinesis. So I added them before I had Hiretual ingest the resume. And then it breaks it down into its atomic parts, which in this case are keywords. And then you can use the the tools, the insight tools, to, you know, get a decent pool of candidates going. Obviously, the more keywords that you use, the less candidates you're going to get. But the point here is to just break this down into its constituent components, which is keywords. And then one cool thing that Hiretual does is, at this point, it will give you candidates that it thinks you're going to like, and it calls that AI. Now, I would be a little hesitant to call anything that any recruiting platform does, quote unquote, AI, but Hiretual, in my opinion, is pretty close. So it gives you the choice to choose 5 profiles. You either say good fit, not a fit. And if you've done everything right up until that point, with an emphasis on talking to the hiring manager and getting a solid recommendation on what you should be looking for and going from there, these are all going to be pretty close. And this last step, this last bit of clearance that your search has to hurdle, should yield solid profiles or a targeted pipeline, right? And at this point, what you do is you export it. Now, any tool that you're going to use, you know, whether it's Hiretual, Seekout, AmazingHiring, those are the big ones. You know, Human Predictions will let you export your pipeline into a CSV. And what I like to do, I don't like paying for CRMs. I like to make my own CRM with Google Sheets. Now, you may not want to do that, and that's fine. But the point of this is to show you what I do and how I spin up a CRM. So I put the information into my CRM, and you'll notice there's several columns that are important. One, the date, the ID status, and I'll get into that in a little bit, what that means. The sourcer column in green. So if you have more than one team member, what you would do is you would create more initials for them. So let's say it's not you, it's a sourcing pod where you have several sourcers, one project manager, and a recruiter who's not putting any leads into the sheet. You could put another column that says recruiter, and you could assign a recruiter to the leads that you have. But this is just me, and it's simple. And so for the purposes of this demonstration, I just put my own initials, right? First name, last name. And the reason why you split the first name and last name is so when you do outreach, you can export that into a mail merge function, because you can't do, let's say, hi, Ted Hale, you know, it's going to look canned. And you've got obviously the title, the company, source, contact info, and we'll get into good ways to find contact info a little later on. And one thing that Hiretual does, and Seekout does this as well, Seekout actually could be even better at doing this, is providing GitHub information. And that could be interesting for a few different reasons. Basically, if you find that someone's active on GitHub and using GitHub repositories, chances are they're actually doing what they say they're doing on the resume. And you'll see I've stack ranked folks. So when it's time, if a hiring manager or someone on the internal recruiting team asks me for who I think the hot list is, I just sort the range and I show them all the number ones. But this is so I can do that at the drop of a hat. So the basic functionality, and I mean basic, this can get very, very complicated very quickly. The idea is to pull out the metrics that matter. Like for me in this case, we're going to say the metrics that matter are time to hire, time to fill, what percent of outreach is hitting its mark. And one way you can do this is you do data validation. So in the ID status column, you know how they all said sourced when I put them in. As soon as I start doing outreach, I have a bunch of different things that the sheet can tell me. First email, that means I've sent them one piece of correspondence via email. Second email, obvious. First text, I've sent them a text. And the way that I do this, the cadence that I use is in a slide to come. So there's obviously a number of texts. Call back, deselected, and deselected and declined, they can be similar, but deselected means that I deselected them for whatever reason. Decline means that they rejected us. Interviewed, I've interviewed them and have yet to write up their notes. Submittal, bad email, bad phone, so then I can go back with a different tool and get better contact information, and then offer. Now, just with those alone, I should have a pretty decent ability to track almost every single metric that I'm going to want. And another thing to look at are the add-ons. So these are for dealing with any issue that could possibly come up between exporting a CSV or Excel document and then importing something into Google Sheets. You're going to want to change case. Sometimes folks come in and they've got lowercase letters, and you'll usually find this a lot with foreign developers. And there is actually a correlation between that and H-1Bs, but that's for another presentation. So what you want to do is you want to run change case, because if you send outreach to someone and their name isn't capitalized, that is insulting. That's probably pretty obvious. Split names. If for whatever reason their names aren't split, you're going to want to split them for the same reason. You're going to want to remove duplicates so you don't send people multiple outreaches. And power tools, I will leave that to you guys to discover what power tools is. But let's just say that it is a great tool. Now I have two different kinds of ways to send mail merges, mail merge with attachments, and yet another mail merge. So one of them, mail merge with attachments, sends attachments, tells me when the attachments have been opened. YAM, yet another mail merge, gives me open rates. So it kind of depends which one I want to work with for a particular, like which metric is more important. So outreach, right? As time goes on, we realize that outreach is, it's getting harder and harder to engage candidates via email. So does that mean email is dead? I don't think so, but I think its use case is a little different. What I do now is I use outreach just to say, hey, I'm here. And it could be with a creative subject line, because I would say that what you have with email outreach now is the ability to reach someone with a subject line and the first sentence of your email. Chances are they're looking at this on a mobile device, and chances are, depending on their email is set up, the most they're going to see of the content of your email is not longer than one sentence. And when it comes to outreach itself, your message shouldn't be more than 2 swipes long. That means swipes that you can make with your thumb on that tiny screen. And obviously the way you test that is you send a piece of outreach to yourself and see if it takes 2 swipes. And if it takes more than that, you'll want to cut it down. Now I've found, by the way, there's a lot of controversy around what should be the content of your message, what should be the subject line. And I've heard people use pretty devious methods, such as just using RE : and making it look like the candidate was the one that reached out first. So just on instinct, they're clicking and opening that. I don't use that. I know people that get good results doing that, but that's just not necessarily my bag. So what I believe more than, let's say, what the content is, I believe in cadence. So you shoot your first email out. 24 hours later, your second email goes out. Send a text if you can get one. I'm going to show you a great tool that can get phone numbers same day as the second email. And you reference your email. Hey, I reached out to you on XXX email channel. Would really like to discuss what could be a fantastic opportunity. Hit me back. Third email or social outreach 72 hours after initial outreach. Now, chances are, if they don't get back to you after that, the chances are is they're not interested. However, they could become interested, or they could be on vacation. And when you have tools that are very easy to use, where you can blast emails out, with the sophistication of multi-track marketing CRMs, you may as well use it. But if you do that, you're going to want to give your targets a chance to opt out. And I find that's the polite thing to do, because if they say, you're spamming me, you're a jerk, I hate you, you can say, hey, look, check your email, buddy. I gave you a chance to opt out, and it's there 4 times. And you probably won't hear them say, oh, right, yes, thank you. But you can rest easy knowing that they've eaten just a little bit of crow. So for texting, now there's another huge point of controversy. Is it a good idea to hit people up over the phone? I am going to say no. And the reason why is just, in this country at least, we don't have a GDPR framework in place. I personally do not open, or I do not answer any call that I don't know the number anymore. And over the last few years, my feeling about this has multiplied. Right now, open enrollment is starting to happen. We're going to have open enrollment in the state of California for insurance starting in November. And so I'm starting to get phone calls left, right, and center about that with local area codes like 323 and non-local area codes like 480 and area codes from the state of New York. I don't answer any of them. Texting, however, sends a message. So you can ameliorate someone's concern with one line. And it's proven that open rates with text are vastly higher than email. So that's why I like to use them in concert. You use the text to refer someone back to the email, or vice versa. If it's the second or third email outreach and you say, hey, I shot you a text at this number, is that still a good number for you? However you want to play it, as long as both of those spokes are working in concert, you can use a tool like Text Now. Because personally, I don't like using my thumbs that much for texting. I would rather use a keyboard, and it allows my capacity for revision to be much faster. Text Now is free. You can do bulk texting with it. It's a great tool. I love it. So then, using the CRM, you track the outreach, right? And now that we have all these designations, first email, second text, etc., when you sort the range, You can line them up so you get put all the first emails in the same category, and if no one's gotten back to you, it means that you can send them all a second email. So it's a very easy way for one-click management using the sort range function in your Google Drive. So that's how I do that. And if you have more than one if the pod is more than just yourself, you would obviously be organizing this by name, initials. Let's say Sarah Jones is my recruiting partner. I would make sure that the SJs and the PCs are separate. And, I don't reach out to anybody that says it's been declined. This is pretty obvious. Some notes on screening. So now's the part of this process where you're getting into screening. So if you can, get screening questions from the hiring manager, or if you're joining an already existing team, get screening questions from the people that are experienced and know how to make hires. Now, what I like to do is use a call recorder. Some people like voice notes and Google Docs, but I like automatic call recorder because it records the entire conversation. Now, I don't ever share the contents of these recordings with anybody. They're just for me and my notes. And to make it so I don't have to feverishly type and think about two things at once when I'm screening a candidate that's talking to me about a data center migration and it's taking them 10 minutes long. Well, my function in the phone call at that point is just to keep them on track and listen, and I'm comfortable in the knowledge that all of this is being recorded so I can refer to it later. And one thing that I do sometimes is I will put little time codes in my notes, like 10:45, he talks about data migration, or minute 16, he talks about what it will take for him to reload. And so that can be a way to kind of shuttle through a lot of the unnecessary fluff and get to the meat of what the screens are supposed to be. And another thing that I like to do when I have good screening notes is share them with the team. They share their notes with me, and we sort of agree on what a solid screen is. One of the themes of this that should be developing is the stronger the relationship that you can have with your hiring manager, the better the process is going to go. Because it's not easy to find something if you don't know what it is. And since this is an iterative process, you want to be able to talk to these folks regularly. And if you can't, you can't. That's fine. But if you have someone with buy-in and the first steps of the process were designed to elicit buy-in, you'll be able to do something like, hey, these are the notes from my screen. I know the candidate ultimately didn't work out, but let me know what you thought of the questions I was asking. And they'll say, okay, this one was great, on target, would have dug in more here, etc. So then that process becomes iterative. Now, define your sprint. Some of the folks that have been doing this for a while probably saw this coming. So for those that don't, I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to dance around the term agile, and then we're going to get deeper into the what agility is. Now, define your sprint. A sprint is a time-boxed iteration of a continuous development cycle. Now, this is a term that software developers use to discuss, say, building a feature for an app. Like, let's say, using the Facebook example, that you want to build out a functionality in groups that allows people to see their own groups. Now, there may be software-wise 10,000 lines of code that need to be written for that. It has to go through QA. There's a lot of steps necessary to deploy that feature, and the way they manage it is iterations called agile sprints. And so since you're a tech recruiter, you may as well do things that software developers do and at least try to get in that headspace somewhat. It seems like it's kind of fluffy, it kind of sounds like osmosis, learning by osmosis, but it truly does help. It's kind of like sitting with the developers. So how you define a sprint, which a time box iteration of work, could be different than how I would define mine. But in the project that I reference, I would define a sprint as the discovery, engagement, and outreach cadence involving 250 honed leads in 1 week. So that means I source 250 leads in a week that I know are good, and I reach out to them using my 3-day outreach cadence. And at that point, I've completed 1 sprint. Now, if you're working with a team, you make sure that the parameters of the sprint have been communicated to everybody on the team, what the deliverables are, and what will be discussed in the retrospective. Retrospective is the other half of the sprint. It is what you talk about between sprints and allows you to iterate using all the metrics that you've chosen. Loop recruiting teams in your retrospectives. If the hiring managers or representatives from the company are interested in hearing how you do your sprints, loop them in as well. They may be able to give you different metrics than you thought of. And that comes down to a principle: the more outside parties that have buy-in, the more blockers that can be eliminated. You have probably no idea the blockers that you have until you have someone internal sit down in your process and say, oh, I didn't know that you guys didn't have more than agency access to Greenhouse. Let me clear that up for you. Now you have access to our entire ATS. That's an example of something that you didn't know was a problem until you knew it was a problem. So the number one thing sprint cycle should be is iterative. Second thing is trackable. So the way to do that is you establish metrics. And this is another thing that can be iterated. You may not know in the beginning what metrics you want to track, and that's fine. But for the aforementioned products or aforementioned project that I am referencing in this slide deck, I'll say the things that I want to know: average number of candidates sourced per hire. Target should be 120 to 150 for senior SDEs in an A, B, or C market. Now, an A market is something like the Bay Area, New York, LA. B, something like Chicago. C, Houston, Dallas, Atlanta. Actually, I think Atlanta might be a B market. This is written down somewhere. But the idea is you're going to want 120 to 150 leads. So when I say 250, that's 2 hires. And for this DevOps rec, they needed 2 DevOps engineers, and it was an evergreen, for all intents and purposes, an evergreen rec. After that, they were going to need 2 more and 2 more and 2 more. Percent screen prospects accepted for interview. So that's a huge metric to track from sprint to sprint. How many submittals per hire? And even more important metric, cold outreach response rate. If you can get 30% of passive candidates to respond, you're doing okay. If you can get 30% of passive candidates to respond positively, you're an absolute rock star. Average number of days from rec open to first candidate accepted by hiring manager. Now this one's a little less obvious because it doesn't have to do as much with what you're doing in terms of outbound sourcing. It's more about how you're interacting with the company. So let's say you open the rec, you have your meeting, you do everything you're supposed to do, and the hiring manager takes a week. You can note that and say, okay, in the next sprint, we want to lower that number. And then it's going to take some doing, but it's going to take different kind of work. Recruiting cost ratio. That's another one. Sum of all recruiting costs divided by full-time staff. And that's how you can get a metric, real cost per hire. And that's one way you can sell yourself. You can say, hey, look, You guys are paying X amount of money for an agency hire, source with an Agile pod, and you'll pay 1/4 of that. This is always usually less than an agency fee. So now that we have completed a sourcing sprint, we implement continuous improvement. So what the point of continuous improvement is to get your product on the streets quicker. And unlike Toyota, which did this to get Toyotas on the street quicker, our product is hires, right? So what we do this by eliminating waste, improving results from sprint to sprint so we can identify that waste. And this allows us to pivot quickly because we can figure out what things are easy to pivot and what things are like turning the Titanic around an iceberg. And we can note that and say, all right, next time around, I want this to be easier. Figure out the metrics that matter to you and track them from sprint to sprint. Change them if necessary. You know, if some sort of reorg happens within the company, it may be, you maybe have to throw away your metrics and create entirely new ones. Like I said before, if you have buy-in from HR leaders, they can eliminate blockers for you, so try to involve them in what you do. Now you are an Agile recruiter. What you want to be proactive, proactively pipeline candidates if you can. Fine-tunable, pivotable, plug and play into an org of any size, scalable, iterative. Again, we're following the lean manufacturing model, but instead of cars, we are increasing delivery accuracy and speed of our product, which is hires. So the folks that invented Agile Scrum, or one of them, was a pilot in Vietnam and flew A4s in formation. And so that's why you'll see a lot of metaphors like that in the world of Agile. But here's the best one that I love. A rocket aimed toward the moon will not get there with a single calculation. Constant micro adjustments are necessary. So it takes thousands and thousands of calculations to get a rocket to the moon. Even though you've aimed there, the one thing that they know in the beginning of this is that they want to go to the moon. So that's why you have a meeting in the beginning. You say, where do we want to go? How many hires do we want? What are we hiring for, etc. And if that changes and nobody tells you about it, you're screwed. But with an Agile process, you'll find out. It will show up. So this is an actual sheet that I use to track sprint metrics from in between sprints in a prior project. So you'll see we've got the sprint cycle denoted by the week, the amount of leads sourced, the amount of applies, the open rate, screens, submittals, screen to submittal ratio, and the takeaways, which is in another sheet. But it's very easy, by the way, to create these pivot tables and graphs and pie charts inside Google Sheets. And these are things that I know CRMs, they charge a lot of money for. But it's quite simple. The toughest part is picking whatever color you want and picking the layout of what you want this to look like. But this kind of thing impresses hiring leaders. So you'll see candidates sourced by sprint that there was a huge drop off, between 2.1 and 2.6. So that's when you get together and you say, okay, what happened? Was everybody planning things for Valentine's Day, or what went down here? It just makes it easier. And as if you track the same metrics from sprint to sprint, you have the makings of continuous improvement. So now that you know what my process is about and what's at the heart of my process, I'll get a little granular on what my extension stack looks like. As everyone knows, Google Chrome is a very handy tool. And
hey, Patrick.
Yeah.
Real quick, before you go on, I just wanted to interrupt and let the audience know that we are receiving your questions. And if you don't have an answer to your question by the end of this webinar, feel free to forward those to Ashley at RecruitingDaily.com, and I'll make sure Patrick has them. There's a lot of info here today, so we do not want to interrupt Patrick too many times. We want you to get everything he's got on the deck for you. Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to let everybody know.
No problem.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Evernote. I consider Evernote to be a digital extension of my brain, and you can program Evernote to work in sync with how you work. You can organize things into silos or projects. You can share people into them. You can create notes. You can join the notes. You can take a giant document and split it 10 ways, 1,000 ways. It is, in my estimation, the best tool out there for organizing thoughts. Seekout. Seekout is great for capturing profiles and putting them into projects. Their particular extension, I think, is the best at this. I love using Seekout just to organize things into project folders within Seekout, because you can search within Seekout, or you search on the web and you say, oh, this person looks good for a prior project that I've had. You import it into Seekout into a project that you've already created. I found, however, and people are probably going to debate me on this, that it's not so great for finding personal emails. OpenList. You can paste multiple URLs inside OpenList, open them in your browser. Sometimes you'll have the need to open 30 URLs at once. OpenList is great for that. Hiretual. I find Hiretual's personal email finder stronger than Seekout's. And then SignalHire. I use SignalHire to find emails that Seekout and Hiretual can't seem to get. And I even have another cleanup after that. ContactOut, I just recently got my access to ContactOut revoked, and I'm really mad about it. Now they want $1 million from me, and I don't really feel like giving them all of my hard-earned money. And I don't think ContactOut, all these companies, you know, that basically all these email finders seem to want to evolve into CRMs, which I'm not sure what the business case for that is. I just like a thing that can scrape emails for me. And so since ContactOut's trying to do that, they have raised their price to something astronomically high. AmazingHiring has a good email finder on it. Glossary Tech, we talked about that. Link to Sheet is an extension that you put in LinkedIn, and it operates within Google Sheets, and you use it to save LinkedIn profiles to a particular Google Sheet. You know, you can use Citable for this in a different way, but Link to Sheet, there's some debatability about how safe it is as a LinkedIn extension, about how it uses LinkedIn's API. So I would encourage everyone to do their own research on this, and then they can decide whether they want to use it or not. LinkedIn Sales Navigator, that's something I use with Gmail that enriches Gmail data. Say you get an email address of someone and you queue up their email in your email box, it will pull up a LinkedIn profile for them if it has a LinkedIn profile that's associated with their email address. So it's sort of like backwards referencing an email. Like say you get a list of conference attendees and you get their emails first, you would run it through LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Swordfish is just magic. It's good at finding emails, but it's fantastic at finding phone numbers. I do not know what it is that they've done, but Swordfish is really great. But Patrick, Hiretual is expensive / not my thing. And you know, that's why this is my stack, but I'll get briefly into, you know, what someone else's stack could be. You know, let's say you just want to do web sourcing. Use Link to Sheet to snap up profiles that you've sourced, import them into Google Sheets, or use ZapInfo. Now, I know there's a lot of folks that like ZapInfo. That's part of Dean DaCosta's stack, for instance, and I think ZapInfo is great. Then you use Hunter for Sheets to get emails in a much cheaper way than you can with any of the other tools that I mentioned. And then you use Citable. Like let's say your research forks. You can leave a note and it will tell you exactly when it forks. So that's kind of like if you're moving between sourcing on the web and then you get into LinkedIn and you find a profile that's similar, you know, because sometimes LinkedIn will display similar profiles or people also viewed on the right-hand page, and you click on one of those to kind of track that fork in the research. you would use Citable. So one of the things that I do since I have a Seekout extension is my Google results are enhanced. And so when I do export into other tools or use a tool like ZapInfo to get it, all this data will come with it. So this is just an example of what it looks like when you parse all this information into ZapInfo. And then Hunter for Sheets, basically you put everything into the sheet and you tell Hunter what their first name, last name, their domain is, and they will generate a corporate email address. Now this is the cheapest way to find contact information that I've seen so far, but its drawback is it's only corporate emails. So Seekout for insights. Now I know that, and this is on purpose, a lot of what I've been doing is not mentioning LinkedIn. Right now, it's still the sine qua non tool. You need it, but there's a lot of other things that can do what it can do. And one of those examples, one of the people really like Recruiter, or one of the things people really like about Recruiter is the insights. So I decided to use Accenture as an example here. These people insights, and this is a new function of Seekout, I think does just fantastic. So I'll scroll down. It gives you the percentage of, you can do a whole org mapping with this. Looks like Accenture's got a lot of repeat employees. Different titles. You can show more. These are the skills they have. Diversity level, if you're a diversity hiring. Years of experience, years in role. Schools, degrees, majors. Industry, certifications, volunteering. The list goes on. Groups, Facebook groups, interests, etc. So it's a lot cheaper to get those insights than to go to LinkedIn Recruiter for them. So a little recap on the tool part. Hiretual is magic for junior to mid-senior software engineers in recognizable niches. Seekout is great for finding highly specific candidates. It's a purple squirrel hunter. In the words of a colleague, it's kind of an aggressive metaphor. Hiretual is like a machine gun, and Seekout is like a sniper rifle. AmazingHiring is great for EU and is very GDPR compliant. So if you're sourcing in EU or EMEA, AmazingHiring is a good one. If you have the ability to get several, great. Each algorithm is going to find different ones and the other ones won't. All of them have easy ways to enrich and export candidate data. And like I said, LinkedIn Recruiter's search functionality gets more blunted with time. It's only edges the radar. So I dare you guys to try to export your project data, and you'll see that LinkedIn really doesn't like recruiters anymore. So in conclusion, this is apparently right at noon. My stack methodology implementation works for me. Your mileage may vary. That means you plug and play things that are going to get you where you want to go, but at least now you'll have an understanding of how and when to pivot. As recruiters, and this is the recruiting paradox, we're expected to be experts on topics we know very little about. Do I know anything about how to code in Python? Well, a little bit, because I did it as part of a recruiting group, but chances are we're not software developers, but we have to at least act like we know with authority what these people are talking about. So we need ways to learn quickly, iterate fast towards true expertise. While there's no substitute for experience, reading resumes and experiencing multiple use cases for tools, seeing how they fail and succeed, etc., we can give ourselves an edge by following this strategy. Learn to spot differences between spoke failures and wheel failures. Now, you remember in the beginning, I showed you the wheel, and that was the whole process from start to finish. Now, it's fine. One of those processes may not work. Like if you're expecting to get good feedback from a hiring manager after a sourcing sprint, and that's going to guide you into your next sprint, great. Unless you don't get that feedback. And then you're hamstrung and your next sprint sucks and you're wondering why. So that means you got to take that part of the process out. But if the entire wheel is wrong, if you've implemented a proactive sourcing function that is predicated on finding leads to stuff pipelines that don't exist yet in a company that keeps pivoting, you're going to continue to fail. So you've got to separate implementation failures, process failures, and different kinds of failures, and understand which one those are. And failure will happen. Just fail forward fast. Everything is iteration if you have that mindset. And lastly, and most importantly, and I'm going to end on this note, it's easy to forget one fundamental truth beneath all the strides towards greater productivity and automation, that we are dealing with people at the end of the day. And in passive candidates, we should be getting fulfillment. Obviously, we're getting paid, so that is a form of fulfillment, but we should be gaining fulfillment by showing them opportunities that may just be better than what they were doing before. So don't forget that. This is a human-centric business, and if you lose sight of that fact or don't care for it, this business is probably not for you. So just remember that underneath all the marine layers of tech and automation and agile thought, and you'll do great. Thank you.
Love that. I love the way you closed off. That is just that's the fundamental. So it's really refreshing to have you return there after all the tech talk. So important.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. This was fantastic. I mean, do you have a few minutes to answer some questions for people who are able to hang around?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, we did have a few questions come in about the glossary tech, just how you access or where you find the glossary.
Okay, yeah, so glossary tech is a Chrome extension. So if you just Google glossary tech extension, it will take you to the page where you can download it.
Okay, I'll type that into the chat, everyone, so you can copy paste. Well, I'm sure you don't need it, but anyways. Okay, and we did have another question about your recorder. What call recorder do you use? Because it seems like there are some new laws being passed. I think that's just asking for advice from you.
I have an Android phone, and what I use is called Call Recorder for Android, or just Call Recorder. And its logo is a red circle with a little green phone icon in the center of it. And it, by default, records all of my phone calls and then purges them at the end of the month, unless I save them.
Awesome, thank you so much. And we also had a question, this may take a little bit of work, about what tools you pay for and what you use, what you find for free. If you do have a chance, or if you have some list that you're able to send to me, I'll add that to the webinar. If not, it's cool, we can look those up.
Okay.
Everybody, this was a fantastic show. Patrick, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here today. I actually generally interrupt on purpose just to break things up, but I was learning, and so completely lost track of time there. That was wonderful.
I'm glad. I hope it was edifying and educational, and yeah, any questions definitely would be willing and excited to answer. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, yep, you guys send your questions over. If you have any more, please keep an eye on your inbox. We'll be sending a copy of the slide deck and the recording to you in the next probably 3 to 4 hours. If you don't get that by tomorrow morning, email me at ashley@recruitingdaily.com and I'll make sure you have it. Other than that, I think we're good to go. Are you good?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you soon.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Patrick.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.